It was the kind of office that made you feel like you had finally arrived. The sleek glass walls, the designer furniture, the view of the San Francisco skyline that you could never take for granted. I had worked for this company for over 5 years. I had started from the ground up, working late nights and weekends to build something meaningful. I was a young, ambitious man with a dream that felt almost within reach. And then there was the success. Slowly but surely, it started to come together. Promotions, pay raises, opportunities I never could have imagined when I walked in that first day as an eager intern. I had finally gotten to a place where I could afford the things I had always dreamed of: a luxurious car, an expensive watch, designer suits, and the finest dinners at exclusive restaurants in the city. At first, I thought nothing of it. To me, these were just rewards for the years of hard work. I earned them, I told myself. I worked harder than anyone in that office, and I deserved to enjoy the fruits of my labor. But what I didn't realize was that some of the people around me didn't see it the same way. It started small, a glance here, a comment there. People would whisper behind my back, wondering where I was getting the money to live this lifestyle. My boss, Mr. Carson, a man in his late 40s who had made his fortune through sheer ambition and ruthlessness, seemed to take notice. He was a shrewd businessman, but he had always been distant. He never had a personal connection with me, or anyone, really. His focus was always on the bottom line, and the moment he started to see my success as a threat, everything changed. It was during a quarterly meeting that things took a turn. I had just walked in, wearing a brand new custom-tailored suit and a limited edition watch, something I had been eyeing for months but had just recently been able to afford. As I sat down, I noticed Mr. Carson glancing at my watch more than once. He had always been the kind of guy who wore the same basic outfit, dark suits, plain shirts, and didn't care much for extravagance. But as the meeting progressed, I could sense his discomfort. At first, I thought it was all in my head. But then the tone shifted. "There's been talk around the office," he began, his voice cold and calculated, "about the lifestyle some of you are leading. I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but I need to make one thing clear. Here, we value hard work above all else. Not the car you drive, not the watch on your wrist, not the expensive lunches you enjoy. I don't want any distractions from what we're really here to do." The room fell silent. It was as if all the air had been sucked out of the space. I tried to brush it off, thinking maybe he was talking about someone else. But as the days passed, I realized it wasn't just the office whispers or subtle stares. It was deliberate, calculated. He was watching me. I couldn't help but wonder if my success had become more of a threat to him than a reason to celebrate. I had worked hard to get where I was. My achievements were not handed to me. But now, my newfound wealth, my success, seemed to be pushing me further from the place I had fought so hard to be. It felt as though every move I made was under a microscope. One Friday, after a long week of meetings and deadlines, I received an email from HR. The subject line read, "Meeting request, immediate action required." I knew something wasn't right. It was the tone, the urgency. As I sat down at my desk, I clicked open the email. The contents were simple and direct. "We'd like to discuss your recent behavior and concerns regarding your personal image at the company. Please join me for a meeting at your earliest convenience." I didn't need to read it twice to understand that this wasn't just a routine check-in. This was the beginning of something bigger. My lifestyle had become a problem. It was a Friday afternoon when I got the call to meet with Mr. Carson. His voice was firm on the other end. "I'll see you at 2 p.m. in my office. This needs to be addressed immediately." As I prepared for the meeting, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was the moment everything was going to change. And it did. When I walked into Mr. Carson's office, the atmosphere was tense. His back was turned to me as he looked out over the city through his massive windows. The sunlight was beginning to fade, casting long shadows across the room. I couldn't help but feel a sense of foreboding, as if the room itself was holding its breath. "Take a seat, Mark," he said, his voice calm but cold. "We need to talk." I sat down across from him, trying to remain composed. I had worked for this man for years, and I had respected him. At least I used to. But today, I was sitting in front of someone I didn't recognize. There was no warmth, no camaraderie, just the sharp edge of a business decision that I couldn't see coming. "Mark, I've been noticing your recent behavior," he started, his fingers steepled in front of him. "Your attitude, your lifestyle choices, the car, the clothes, the watches. People are starting to talk. It's becoming a distraction." A cold shiver ran down my spine. "A distraction," I repeated, disbelief creeping into my voice. "I've been doing my job. I've been putting in the hours. My work is what matters, isn't it?" He looked at me, his eyes narrowed, almost as if he was scrutinizing me. "It's not about your work, Mark. You've been a great employee, no doubt. But this is about perception. This is about how you're being seen by the others in the office. People are starting to think you're more interested in your lifestyle than your job, and when that happens, it starts to affect the whole team." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "You're firing me over my lifestyle, over the things I've worked hard to earn." His gaze hardened. "You're not getting fired. Yet. But if this continues, if you keep flaunting your wealth, if you keep making it obvious that you're different from everyone else, then we'll have no choice but to take action." The words hung in the air, thick with the weight of their meaning. I felt my pulse quicken, my hands starting to sweat. I had worked so hard to get here, to rise through the ranks, to earn the life I had dreamed of. And now, it seemed like all of that was at risk, simply because I had bought a car and a few nice things. "Mr. Carson," I said, my voice shaking slightly, "you hired me because of my skills. You knew what kind of person I was when I started here. I didn't change. I achieved things." "Achieved things?" he scoffed, leaning back in his chair. "That's the problem, Mark. You've achieved too much, too fast, and now it's causing issues. I'm trying to protect the integrity of this company. The company values hard work, dedication, and team cohesion. If people start thinking it's all about what you can buy, it sends the wrong message." I was stunned. The words he was saying didn't make any sense to me. All this time, I had thought I was building something with the company. I had thought that my success was a reflection of the company's growth, that we were all in it together. But now it felt as though my achievements were being used against me. "Look, I'm just asking for you to tone it down," he continued, his tone softening just slightly. "You don't need to give up everything. Just be more subtle about it. People need to focus on their work, not on your new car or that flashy watch you've been wearing. I want you to focus on what really matters here." I felt a surge of anger rising in me, but I swallowed it down. "So, what do you want me to do? Stop living my life? Stop celebrating my success?" "I'm not saying that," he replied, the slightest hint of frustration creeping into his voice. "I'm just saying that you need to understand the impact it's having on the team. People are starting to resent you, and that's the last thing we need right now." I could feel my face growing hot with frustration. I had worked tirelessly to get to this point. I had sacrificed so much, my time, my energy, my personal life, to get to where I was. And now I was being told that my success was a liability, a threat to the company, a distraction. It didn't make sense. But the reality was, I could see the change in Mr. Carson's eyes. The decision was already made. I wasn't just in trouble, I was being pushed out. He might as well have told me straight away, but instead he chose to drag it out, making it feel like it was all for my own good. I stood up, my mind racing. "So, what's next? Do I need to resign? Do I need to make an announcement about my lifestyle change?" "No, not yet," he said, a dismissive wave of his hand. "But you'll need to prove that you can conform to the company culture. If you can do that, maybe we'll see eye to eye again. But if this continues..." He trailed off, leaving the words hanging in the air, heavy with threat. The meeting ended shortly after that, with no resolution in sight. I walked out of his office, my mind spinning, my chest tight. I had never felt so small in my life. I had worked so hard to get here, and now it felt like everything was crumbling around me for something I couldn't control. But this wasn't the end. This was just the beginning. And I would make sure that Mr. Carson and everyone else at that company understood that I wasn't going to let them dictate how I lived my life. The revenge story was only just starting. The days following that meeting with Mr. Carson were strange. I kept showing up to work, kept doing my job, kept smiling when I needed to. But inside, I was fuming. I didn't sleep much. I kept running that conversation over and over in my head. You've achieved too much, too fast. That line burned. I knew I had a target on my back now. No matter how much value I brought to the company, I wasn't part of the inner circle anymore. But instead of getting angry, I decided to get strategic. You see, in Silicon Valley, knowledge is power, and I had plenty of it. I had worked on the backbone of our most profitable platform. I had built proprietary systems and optimization algorithms that made us millions in just the last quarter alone. But more importantly, I knew where the company's weak spots were, structurally, legally, and reputationally. I didn't want to burn bridges. I wanted to build my own. So I quietly began preparing my exit on my own terms. I started documenting everything, every line of code I had written, every feature I had designed. I compiled it all into a clean, well-organized portfolio, not for legal action, but to remind myself. I had built this, not alone, but I was a major architect. But the real weapon wasn't the code, it was the relationships. I had developed strong ties with two key clients. One was a major e-commerce player, and the other was a digital healthcare startup with billions in funding. I didn't pitch them anything yet, but I started casually grabbing coffee, talking shop, listening. When one of them mentioned they were frustrated with our customer support team and felt like we weren't prioritizing their roadmap anymore, I mentally flagged it. That was my opening. Back at the company, the atmosphere was getting colder. I noticed the subtle changes. I was removed from key Slack channels. I was no longer CC'd on certain emails. My calendar slowly emptied out. It was clear they were phasing me out. And yet, they still relied on my systems to keep the engine running. Irony at its finest. One morning, I found my login credentials to our internal analytics tool had been revoked. That was it. I walked out of the office that evening without saying a word to anyone. I took the elevator down 15 floors to the parking garage, sat in my Tesla, and just stared out the windshield for a full 5 minutes. I had reached my limit. It was time to move. The next day, I called up one of my clients, the e-commerce company. "Hey Greg," I said, "I've been doing some thinking. What would you say if I told you I could offer you a leaner, more responsive team, custom-built for your exact growth needs without the bureaucracy?" Greg paused. "You're leaving the company?" "Not officially, yet. But I want to build something smarter, more agile, less ego-driven." He didn't say much more, but 2 days later, I got a call back. "Let's talk." That's how the revenge started. Not with a lawsuit, not with a confrontation, but with a conversation. By the end of the week, I had meetings lined up with 3 of the company's top 5 clients. I wasn't soliciting them, just asking questions, listening, learning about their pain points. Every call gave me another puzzle piece. Every concern they voiced about our company was something I knew I could do better. Meanwhile, I started forming a team. Quietly, discreetly. A designer from a competitor who was itching for a change. A brilliant back-end developer I'd met at a hackathon. A product manager who'd recently left Google. We started sketching ideas, mapping out infrastructure, deciding on a brand name. This wasn't just going to be a revenge project, it was going to be a company. I even found an angel investor who'd backed my old roommate's startup. After a quick pitch deck and a 30-minute Zoom call, he said, "I like it. I'll wire you 250 TAs as a convertible note." No cap for now. It felt unreal. Back at the office, they still hadn't officially fired me, but I knew it was coming. My keycard was still active, but barely. I wasn't being asked to lead any new initiatives. I was essentially a ghost. Until one Friday afternoon, I was asked to join Mr. Carson in his office again. He didn't waste time. "Mark," he said, "we appreciate everything you've done here, but we're moving in a different direction. Today will be your last day. HR has your separation packet. We'll pay out your unused PTO, and there's a 3-month severance included." I nodded. I didn't argue. I didn't ask why. I simply stood up and said, "Thank you for the opportunity." But as I left, I smiled, because I had already taken the first steps toward building something they could never fire me from. Something better, something mine. There's a strange thing about power in Silicon Valley. It's not just about who has the title or the corner office. It's about who controls the narrative. After my strategic networking at the yacht club, I started hearing whispers, not just about John, but about me. Apparently I was the guy who got fired for owning a Rolex and came back smiling. That kind of story, well, it travels fast in the valley. But I wasn't done. I needed more than just admiration. I needed leverage. One evening, at a fintech conference in Palo Alto, I bumped into Nora Kim, former VP of strategy at Vantech. Brilliant, sharp, and someone who once quit Vantech due to creative differences with John. We started talking over drinks, casually at first. But then I leaned in and said, "You know, I think we both have a story that overlaps." She gave me a half smile and replied, "Depends. Are you trying to burn him down or build something better?" I said, "Both." She paused, then said something that changed everything. "Then you need to talk to Leo." Leo Zhang was Vantech's ex-chief compliance officer. Quiet, discreet, and notoriously hard to find. Rumor had it he left after discovering some serious discrepancies in internal acquisitions. Nothing illegal had been proven, but in tech, shadows like that never fully fade. After 2 weeks of back-channeling, I met Leo at a minimalist tea bar in San Francisco's Mission District. He came in wearing glasses and a Patagonia vest, looking more like a coder than a former exec. "Why are you digging into this?" he asked me point blank. I looked him in the eyes. "Because I want to build something that actually rewards people for merit, not status. And because I was fired for buying a watch." Leo chuckled. "That's the most Silicon Valley reason I've ever heard." Then he opened his laptop and showed me documents. Internal memos, reports, flagged transactions from a shell company Vantech had quietly acquired under John's instruction. It wasn't proof of crime, but it was proof of manipulation, proof of favoritism, proof that Vantech's so-called meritocracy was a lie. I knew I couldn't take this to the press. Not yet. But what I could do was build my own company, fueled by transparency and real talent. And I could make sure Vantech lost their brightest minds along the way. So I made my next move. I started reaching out, not to executives, but to engineers, product leads, designers, the ones who make the magic happen but rarely get the glory. I invited them to private dinners, shared my vision, showed them Leo's data, Nora's insight, and most importantly, I offered them equity, real influence, and freedom to create. One by one, they began to say yes. It wasn't revenge anymore, it was revolution. And John, well, he was too busy playing politics to notice the storm quietly forming just outside his glass tower. John had always believed he controlled the narrative, that he was the sun in the Silicon Valley sky, everyone else just orbited around him. But he didn't notice the quiet shift. Not at first. It began with Rachel from product design. She submitted her 2-week notice and declined a counteroffer. Then Amir from the AI team. Then Dev from back-end infrastructure. By the time Vantech's HR flagged the 4th exit in a month from high-performing teams, John's polished mask was starting to crack. And while all that was happening, I was working from a borrowed co-working space in Soma, with whiteboards filled with architecture plans and values we actually believed in. Trust, autonomy, impact. We called it Embercore. Why Embercore? Because even when fire is extinguished, embers stay alive, glowing quietly, ready to ignite something new. I poured every ounce of my severance package and savings into the MVP. Our vision was simple, a decentralized team collaboration tool with built-in transparency, everything from decision logs to compensation modeling, visible to all stakeholders. When I reached out to Rachel, Amir, and Dev, I didn't promise perks or prestige. I promised purpose. And they came. Within 6 months, Embercore was buzzing. We hadn't even launched to the public yet, but early demos had stunned potential investors. What made us different wasn't just tech, it was culture. Engineers actually had a say in company direction. Decisions were data-backed, not ego-driven. And best of all, no one cared what kind of car you drove or what you wore. But John, he cared. He finally connected the dots when someone from his board forwarded a TechCrunch blind item. Ex-Vantech employees. Fueling mysterious new startup set to disrupt collaboration market. He was furious. One evening, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. I picked up. It was John. He opened with, "You think this will last?" I smiled. "Long enough to outlast everything you built by stepping on people." There was a long silence. Then he said, "You made a mistake leaving." "No," I replied. "You made a mistake thinking you could buy loyalty and silence with money. People don't work for money. They work for meaning." And I hung up. That call wasn't about him threatening me. That was fear. He was watching the empire he ruled start to crack from within, and he had no idea how to stop it. I was no longer the guy with a Rolex he envied. I was the guy who'd built something he couldn't control. But the real showdown was still to come. It all came to a head on a Thursday afternoon, a private VC showcase event in Palo Alto. The top 12 startups in stealth mode had been invited to pitch to a panel of angel investors, board advisors, and a few top-tier tech journalists. Embercore was one of them, and so was Vantech. They had pivoted, John claimed, to building transparent collaboration software, suspiciously similar to what Embercore had been developing for the past year. Coincidence? Not a chance. When we walked into the venue, John's eyes locked with mine from across the room. His expression was a cocktail of disbelief, rage, and just a tinge of fear, because I wasn't alone. My team walked in with me, Rachel, Amir, Dev, polished, confident, and ready to present the vision they had helped shape. We were no longer ex-employees. We were co-founders. We were a movement. John took the stage first. His pitch was sleek, rehearsed, full of buzzwords. But as he spoke about trust, transparency, and democratized work culture, the irony was so thick you could feel the room stiffen. Then came our turn. I stood in front of a room filled with millionaires, visionaries, and people who'd seen every pitch under the sun. And I told a story, not of code or metrics, but of culture, of a company born from betrayal but built on belief, of a team that had been dismissed as replaceable, who then created something irreplaceable. I spoke of systems that didn't reward loud voices but valued quiet brilliance, of tools that didn't just track productivity but elevated humanity. When I finished, there was silence, and then thunderous applause. One investor came up to us afterward and said, "I've seen hundreds of founders pitch ideas, but you just pitched a revolution." That evening, TechCrunch dropped a headline. From fired to funded, Embercore raises $12 million to take on Vantech at its own game. The article didn't just tell our story. It exposed Vantech's last-minute pivot, questioned their motives, and praised our courage. By Monday, the fallout began. Vantech's board called an emergency meeting. By Friday, John was out. Fired. Not for crashing profits, not for public humiliation, but for failing the very culture he claimed to lead. I heard later that he tried to pitch a new startup 6 months later, but word had gotten around. Investors weren't interested in founders who treated people like tools. As for Embercore, we didn't just survive, we scaled. And every time I looked around our office or checked our Slack thread, I remembered the Rolex. The one thing that started it all. It was still in my drawer, not as a trophy, but as a reminder that in Silicon Valley, revenge isn't loud. It's quiet, strategic, surgical, and best served in shares, not screams. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us keep bringing you more true stories of revenge, resilience, and justice. Stay tuned. The next tale might just give you goosebumps.